Hey, everybody. I'm Conscious Medium Brandon Russ. And those of you that don't know, I'm also an adoptive foster parent, which is why I wanted to share with you my view on the alleged crimes, the war crimes on Putin and his firsthand person um, around things in the Ukraine war. First and foremost, just to kind of tell you a little bit about my journey. And by the way, I do talk about it in my book. I talk about how I have a past life, uh, you know, with one of my children, and it's very poignant. It's a very good read in terms of kind of how I got here, if you will. Um, and some of what I want to share with you is kind of behind the scenes thing, and that is why like what Vladimir Putin and Maria, and I had to look this up, Lvova-Belova, if I'm saying the Vova-Belova, Maria Vova-Belova. We're going to say that three times really fast in respect to her alleged crimes. Um, why it hits home to somebody like me. And I've sided with the Ukrainians not because they're not politically fastidious, not because there isn't chicanery that's going on with everybody from Trump to Biden to Bush's to Cheney's to Obama's to a lesser extent, but there's no stone unturned from the United States political theater to what's going on in Ukraine. And this is what gives me pause. I side with the Ukrainians because I want it to stop, because I think that's the quicker way to it. I don't think Russia is right by doing anything that they're doing. They're being led by a madman, blah, 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 blah. Let the charts show we'll be on the right side of history by supporting Ukraine. But that doesn't mean that there's some culpability into it. I want everybody to understand why this war crime is considered um, genocide. What they're actually trying to do is steal children from the Ukrainians, bring them into Russia, and repopulate Russia. Now they say that there's only about 1,600, but 1,600 is a game changer. I mean, it's not a small number. This was something that happened here in the United States over and over again. And when you become a foster parent, you hear a lot of sides to a lot of different stories. And one of the stories that I spoke to when you do this work, I actually worked with a woman who was shamanic. And because I was adopting children um, that may have been Native American, she looked at me as the enemy because she herself was Native American. And what the Native Americans would have happen to them is they would be given such poor living conditions that they would come in and say that these are poor living conditions and take their children from them and assimilate them into white families, basically, in a nutshell. And by the way, I don't know if you pick up on this, I'm kind of the white guy in the room when it comes to this conversation. So, what the Ukrainians are actually facing with this, with Maria and Vladimir, is that they were trying to repopulate Russia. And by the way, every economist that talks about the Russian economy talks at great lengths on their biggest weakness is their population now, because they did not replace it. I mean, they have more 50-year-olds than they do 20-year-olds. And that is for two reasons. One, the population didn't replace itself. And number two, there is mass exodus from the country. So they no longer have Russians. They no longer have, what would be considered Russian bloodline. And in the United States, in New York State in particular, because that's what I can speak to, there was a law passed in 1974, give or take, that actually did not allow, if you could show that a child was of a Native American descent, they needed to be raised by their tribe, basically in a nutshell. So this genocide didn't happen because it was a calculated thing. We did it as a country. We did it, like on one side, I cared for the children, where it was whitewashing them, quite frankly. And it's a very important thing. And I don't talk about this in the book, but I'm going to talk about it now. One of the things that took the case so long was because one of the parents claimed that the children were Native American because he was Native American. At the end of the day, it was actually a ploy to push the case down the road so he could know his children. Nobody's ever doubted that he loved his children, right? And one of the things that really kicked the case down the road was this, and the burden of proof is on the parents, to find this. And over time, basically, in a nutshell of what happened, is that after writing every single tribe under the sun and getting so many dejection letters, and they're like, we've never had the history of you. We started keeping track of this in 1945 when it was starting to happen, or whenever the date was. Don't quote me on that. We started dating this before your time and keeping records of it, and we have no record of you. So I'm sorry, we cannot say that you're from this tribe. And he had one letter like that over and over again, and one tribe in particular that was really discombobulated on the Canadian border was able to, which by the way was going to bring in international law, and it was just a big whatever. And at the end of the day, now if you've read the story, he felt like he was living a Native American past life. When it came time for him to surrender, he sat there with a neckerchief on that covered his neck and big earrings that were dream catchers. And, his mental health aside, which I don't talk about why the children were removed from the home, that's not fair. But as I paint this picture, you kind of get an understanding as to why this is, but you'll also understand their passion for their children. That's a thing when you're an adoptive foster parent. It's a thing. Especially when you can read the room. Especially when you can talk to their ancestors. I will say with some certainty that I do not believe that he was of a Native American descent. But I do believe that he loved his children deeply and would do anything to still have them in his life. And because he wouldn't surrender, and again, I talk about this in the book, and I would hope that you would get it and read it just for the story. But basically, in a nutshell, he didn't want to surrender. There was no surrender in him. And when I approached the bench and said, could you use any other word but surrender, they literally stopped the presses and said, is there another word we can use? And they were like, no, we can't. That's the word. That's the legal term, is surrender. Right? And I felt for him that day. The mother wanted to know her children and made a plea so she could at least know them. And then the father was losing all of his rights and could literally never see his children again. And the order was that we were not to facilitate any interaction with them at all. And as much as the order was heartbreaking to him, it was startling to me. And that is how I came to a conscientious objector, and I don't follow that. And I don't want to paint a picture that the kids see their dad every chance they get, but we certainly encourage any interaction so long as he's well, and we'll just leave it there. There's been times where I've seen the dad sitting waiting for a bus, and I stop, and I want to make sure that they kind of know their children. We have a picture of their biological parents with them at a picnic in our dining room, so they know who they are. And two of the children we've had since the day they were born. Another one has fond memories of living in a closet until Department of Social Services happened to show up and do a spot check and find him there. But and again, I don't know that they were abused, but the neglect thing was certainly there from the ability that they had. But back on this Native American piece of it, we had to honor that process. We had to honor what that looked like. And there was good reason. People would always say to me, how's it going? How did you not adopt them yet? This has gone on for 7 years. Yeah, it's been a long time. Typical adoptions happen within 2-3 years at most in foster care, because there is the 27 out of 20, 24 out of 21 out of 27 months. I forget what it is now. It's in the book. But basically, in 2 months and in 2 years and 3 months, if you can consistently, wherever they are for 21 of those 27 months, then that is where they should be. So if they're in a protective placement, they should move towards a protective placement. It's called movement to permanency, right? And placement to permanency. And it's so that then the kids don't live in limbo in 500 houses. Even at the time when he came to us at 4 years old, he had been in 7 homes. Like, is that a failure in the system, or is it an applause that there's such a system that would have 7 homes available? It's up to you to decide. But when I see this as a war crime, when I see this as a wholesale washing, I'm here to tell you this is a big deal. This is a bigger game. Putin's playing the bank. He's playing the oligarchs. He's playing the can I borrow more money till I get to the end of the war thing. You also have this idea that he's trying to restock the pond with fish that aren't native to him. And it should chill you to the bone. This man is not trying to, he thinks he's under the guise of saying it, from like, hey, we're humanitarians and we're doing this. Well, guess what? There's Polish families. There's Belarus families. There's other neighboring countries that could take them in. They're doing it as a matter of proxy. They're doing it as strategy. That's what's frightening. And listen, in a quiet moment, does a foster parent kind of sit there with the idea that you took children away from their parents who, for one reason or another, just couldn't do it. They just couldn't do it to the standards that we set. And listen, sometimes I hear horror stories about these standards that are a moving target depending upon the judge. But this family had 7 years. I mean, they had a long time. They had a long runway to try and take off from it. And they couldn't. They just couldn't do it. So then it's up to us as foster parents, the adoptive team. And I don't want to speak on behalf of them, but I will tell you the consensus is generally that we embrace the idea that they would know their parents, but we want the respect of doing the work every day. All of the parent-teacher conferences, all the scrape knees, all of the questionable self-discoveries that they have about themselves and the bad behavior that needs to be corrected. The stability that we bring is something that we should have respect for. But on the essence of taking children out of their home and their heritage, I mean, I've worked really hard to understand Hispanic culture so that then my kids don't forget that. By the way, they hate rice. They hate Mexican food. They hate authentic Spanish or Dominican Republic food. They don't like it. But then again, we introduced it when they were 2, not when they were newborn. So there's that. Like, we might have failed them a little bit there. But we're conscious of it, and we want to make sure that they kind of get what they need out of it and know that just because their parents are Irish doesn't mean that they are ethnically cleansed and suddenly Irish. That's not the conversation. The conversation is, hey, this is what we celebrate, and this is why we eat corned beef. And if you don't want any, that's okay, but understand that we're going to eat a lot of it today. It's funny how the world theater plays out and you can internalize it much in the same way I just did. Every foster parent that has been in a case where they had it prolonged because of an ethnic reason, and there are several. The Native American is just one of them, but to discover that and to recognize it really hit me to the bone. And this has to be stopped. This is one of the most devious things you could do. And I'm going to put it right up there with bombing a school, with bombing civilians, with bombing innocent people. This is equally as dastardly. It's just not immediate. It's a prolonged pain. And then what? You have a Russian kid that does his genealogy and finds out that he's from Russia, that he's not really from Russia. I've done a lot of work with people that discover their families, and they're lied to because they think they're going to save their feelings. And then all of a sudden in 2010, everybody can just pick up a DNA test. And then they do the DNA test and they're like, everybody's from like upstate New York. Why am I from, Newfoundland? Why does it say I'm Native American? Why does you say I'm Irish and Italian, and this is saying I'm French Canadian and Indian? Like, why is my DNA different from you, mom or dad? Trust me when I say this, that is a common thing in mediumship, where we end up having to sort out the lies that people have told their kids, their children, their family. On my watch as a medium, I have seen more people discover their half-brothers and sisters, their other family, and sometimes it's like it was right down the street the whole time, and they missed out on it. I mean, imagine missing the party every Friday night for your entire life. I know it's an oversimplification to genocide, but that's part of it. One of the biggest fears, and this goes back to the rock star day, of like, hey, I'm going to be a rock star and travel the world or whatever. My biggest fear was to have a child back in Omaha when I never knew existed. It didn't happen, by the way. I was a good boy. But that was the thing that like bands would talk about. Like guys in bands would talk like, hey, we're not going to be like that kind of band. Let Motley Jovi do their thing. We're not going to do that. That's not our thing. Like, it was a legit conversation because we didn't want to be the people that couldn't be engaged in their family, in their creation. This genocide thing out of Ukraine is a big deal. I hope that we do the right thing, and I want you to understand, as somebody that's an adoptive foster parent that had a front row seat as to the reasons why it's important, I'm here to tell you that it's critically important. And it is so devious that someone would think that this is a good thing, Mr. Putin and Miss Maria Porovova or Lolakova, I don't know. The fact that somebody would bring that to fruition is beyond words. So this is my heart tap out to the refugees, that they become reunited to their family. And if their family has been somehow eliminated, eradicated, brutally murdered, whatever Russia's spin is on it, let the Ukrainian government step forward and do what they wish to their ethnicity here. It's very important. Hard taps to the Ukraine people, their heritage, their culture, their being. We've got you.